You think you know what a person looks like when they've got nothing left. You don't. I thought I did, and I'd been ranching this stretch of high desert for 31 years, long enough to watch men lose everything to drought and pride and the bank in that order. I figured I'd seen the bottom of the human well. Then a woman climbed my ridge in a dust storm carrying a cardboard box and a folding chair, and she told me, almost shy about it, that she had just bought the abandoned mine cut into the side of my neighbor's worthless butte. $8. That's what she paid. 8 crumpled dollars at the county's back tax auction for a hole in the rock that didn't even have a door. I laughed. God forgive me, I laughed at her. What I'm about to tell you took the next 2 years to happen, and I was there for most of it, close enough to smell the wet ash and hear the things she said when she thought nobody was listening. I'm not a man who cries. My wife will tell you I didn't cry at our own wedding. But I'm telling you now plain so you'll keep going. By the end of this, that hole in the rock changed more lives than my whole ranch ever did, including mine. So sit with me a while, don't skip ahead. The part that matters most is the part you won't see coming. The wind came first, the way it always does out here before April decides whether it wants to be spring or just keep being winter out of spite. I was out fixing the south fence line, the one that goes nowhere and protects nothing, because a man my age needs an excuse to be alone, and a fence is as good as any. The dust came up off the flats in a long brown wall, the kind that turns the sun into a dirty coin, and I had my bandana up over my nose and my hat jammed down to my ears, and that's how I almost didn't see her. She was maybe 200 yards off, on the rise where my land ends and the Haverson Butte begins, walking into the wind, not around it, not waiting it out behind a rock the way any sensible person would. Straight into it, leaning forward at an angle that didn't look survivable, with a cardboard box clutched against her chest and a folding lawn chair hooked over one arm by its aluminum frame. The chair kept catching the wind and trying to fly. She kept yanking it back down. I want you to understand something about that butte. It is the most useless piece of ground in this county. Old Haverson's grandfather dug a silver mine into it back in the 20s, got about 40 feet in, found nothing worth the dynamite and quit. The mine cut sits about a third of the way up the south face, a black mouth in the red rock with a pile of tailings spilling down beneath it like the rock got sick. Nobody goes up there. Rattlers in summer, nothing in winter. The county had taken it for back taxes when the last Haverson died, and they'd been trying to unload it for a decade. I rode over, not because I'm kind. I want to be honest with you about that, because the version of this where I'm the good Samaritan from the first minute is a lie, and this whole thing falls apart if I start lying now. I rode over because I was curious and a little annoyed. People walking on my land at the edge of a dust storm is the sort of thing that makes a rancher reach for the question, whose is this, and what's it doing here? "Ma'am," I called, and the wind ate half of it. "Ma'am, you lost." She stopped, turned, and I got my first real look at her face. She was somewhere past 60, I'd guess, though the desert ages a person in ways that make guessing a fool's game. Brown skin gone leathery at the cheekbones, deep lines bracketing a wide mouth, and eyes so dark and so steady that they made me feel, for half a second, like I was the one who'd wandered somewhere he didn't belong. Her hair was iron gray and pulled back hard. She had a man's flannel shirt on, way too big, and work boots cracked white at the toes. Her hands, gripping that box, were the hands of somebody who had worked. I clocked all of it the way you do, fast, before manners catch up. "I'm not lost," she said. Her voice was lower than I expected, and it didn't shake, which surprised me, because the wind was howling and she was a woman alone and I was a stranger on a horse. "I'm going home." I looked past her at the butte, at the black mine mouth. "Home," I said. "I bought it." She shifted the box on her hip and dug in the front pocket of those big jeans and came out with a piece of paper, folded into a tight square gone soft at the creases like she'd been holding onto it for days. She held it out into the wind. A county auction receipt. I leaned down off the horse and read it, squinting, the dust stinging my eyes. Parcel 114,882, mineral claim and improvements, sold as is, $8. $8, I read out loud, because my brain refused to do anything else with it. It was all I had, she said. And here's the thing, she didn't say it like a confession. She didn't say it small. She said it the way you'd state the weather. It's going to be cold tonight. It was all I had. Facts of a world that had stopped owing her any apology. I'm ashamed of what I did next. I laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, or I didn't mean it cruel, but there's no version of laughing at a person's last $8 that lands soft, and I knew it the moment it left my mouth. I saw something close down in her face. Not hurt exactly, more like recognition. Like she'd been laughed at by enough men on enough horses that she'd built a room inside herself to keep it in, and she was just opening the door and tossing me onto the pile. There's no water up there, I said, trying to climb back out of the hole I'd dug. No door on that mine. No power. The county couldn't give that rock away for 10 years, ma'am. That's why it was $8. You understand, it's a hole. It's a 40-foot hole in a rock. I understand what it is, she said. Then why? Because nobody can put me out of it. She set the box down at her feet finally and stood up straight, and the wind flattened the big flannel against her so I could see how thin she'd gotten under it. I have been put out of every place I have lived for the last 40 years, mister. Apartments, a trailer, my sister's spare room when my sister was still alive, my own mother's house which I grew up in, sold out from under me by a cousin while I was at the funeral. She said this without heat. A landlord can put you out. A bank can put you out. The county put me out of the last place, a single wide off the highway, because the man who owned the land decided he'd rather have a storage business. She nodded up at the black mouth in the rock. But I own that, outright, free and clear. There is no one on this earth who can knock on that door and tell me to leave because I am the door now. You understand? I didn't yet, but I would. The dust storm chose that moment to gust hard enough to take her chair after all, ripped it right off her arm and sent it cartwheeling down the slope. And she said a word I won't print, and went after it. And I sat on my horse like an idiot and watched a woman past 60 chase a $4 lawn chair down a butte in a dust storm, because $4 was now a fortune to her. Her name, I learned later that day, was Della Mariano, though her mother's people were Chiricahua, and she'd grown up answering to a name she didn't offer me for a long while, and I didn't earn for longer. She'd been a hospital laundry worker for 19 years and a nurse's aide before that, and a lot of other things before that. All of them the kind of work that wears the body out and pays just enough to keep the body coming back. She had no children living. She had a flip phone with 11 minutes left on it. She had the box, the chair, a duffel bag she'd left at the bottom of the slope, and the deed to a hole. I went home that evening and didn't tell my wife about her. I don't know why. Maybe because I was still ashamed of the laugh. Maybe because some part of me, the part that keeps the ranch ledger and notes the weather in a little book every night the way my father did and his father did, I write the high and the low and the wind in one line about the day. That's the whole of my diary, 31 years of it. Some part of me knew this wasn't a one-night story. You learn to feel the long ones coming. The way you feel a storm in a bad tooth. That night I wrote April 9, high 71, low 38, wind from the SW hard. Woman bought the Havorson mine, $8, God help her. The next morning, I rode up the butte to see if she'd frozen to death. She hadn't. She'd done something I still think about. She'd taken the cardboard box apart, flattened it, and used it with rocks to make a windbreak across the bottom third of the mine mouth. She'd found, somewhere, an old wooden pallet and she dragged it up the slope. I could see the drag marks, 2 long furrows in the tailings. And I could only imagine what that climb had cost her, and laid it down inside the cut to keep her bedroll off the cold stone. She had a little fire going just outside the entrance, fed with dead juniper, and a pot of something on it. And when she heard my horse, she came to the mouth of the cave and stood there with her arms crossed, watching me come. And she didn't say good morning, and she didn't say thank you for checking, and she didn't say anything at all. I'd brought a thermos of coffee and two of my wife's biscuits wrapped in a dish towel. I held them up like a flag of truce. She looked at the biscuits for a long moment. I watched the war happen on her face, the pride against the hunger, and I knew which one I was rooting for, and I knew it wasn't pride, and I hated that I'd put her in a position to have to fight it at all. "I don't take charity," she said. "It's not charity, it's coffee. I made too much." A lie, and we both knew it, but it was a lie that let her say yes, and she took the thermos and she took one biscuit, just one, and she ate it slow, in small bites, the way a person eats when they've learned that food is not guaranteed to keep coming. I've seen men come off 3 days lost in the backcountry eat that way. I'd never seen a person eat that way at the start of an ordinary morning in sight of a highway in America. We didn't talk much. I asked if she had water, and she pointed down the slope where she'd cached the jugs she'd hauled, 4 of them. And I did the math in my head, 4 jugs. A woman alone, no well, the nearest spigot the gas station 9 miles off, and the math was ugly. I asked if she planned to stay the summer, and she said she planned to stay until she died, which she figured wouldn't be long, said like it was the punchline to a joke only she found funny. I left the biscuits, rode home, wrote in my book Still Alive, hauling water from town, won't last the month. I was wrong about the month. I was wrong about almost everything that first while. The only thing I had right was that she wouldn't take charity, and even that she'd make me eat eventually, in a way I never saw coming. Here is what I didn't understand yet, sitting on my horse feeling sorry for her and superior to her at the same time, the way comfortable people do. I thought she had bought a hole because she was beaten. I thought the cave was the end of her road, the place a person crawls to lie down. It wasn't the end of anything. She'd looked at the most worthless ground in the county and seen the one thing nobody could ever take, and she'd spent her last $8 to buy it, and that is not the act of a beaten person. That is the act of a person who has done the most dangerous arithmetic there is, figured out exactly how little she needed, and refused to need 1 inch more. It would be 3 weeks before I understood that. It would be 3 weeks before the night the temperature dropped to 19 degrees, and I lay in my warm bed next to my warm wife and thought about a thin woman alone in a hole in a rock, and got up at 2 in the morning and put on my coat, and did the thing I'd sworn I wasn't going to get tangled up in. But that's the next part. What I'll leave you with from that first stretch is this, the picture that won't leave me. The morning after the dust storm, when I rode away, I looked back over my shoulder once, and she was standing at the mouth of her cave with the rising sun hitting the red rock all around her, gold and orange and rust, the most beautiful useless ground in the county lit up like a cathedral. And she was not looking at me, and she was not looking at the highway, and she was not looking down at everything she'd lost. She was looking out at the long, flat country like a woman, surveying something that belonged to her. Because for the first time in her whole life, something did. I broke my own rule on a night in late October. I'd kept my distance through the summer mostly. I'd ridden up maybe once a week, always with some excuse, checking the fence, looking for a strayed heifer that I'll admit was never actually strayed, and I'd leave something each time and pretend I hadn't. A sack of beans on a flat rock, a coil of good rope. Once a second-hand camp stove I told her my wife had been about to throw out, which was such an obvious lie that Della looked at it, looked at me and said, "Your wife was about to throw out a working stove," flat, not even a question, and I said yes. And she said, "Your wife sounds wasteful," and that was as close as we'd come to friendship by August. 2 people lying to each other to make a kindness fit through a door pride had nailed mostly shut. She'd made the cave livable in ways that humbled me. She'd hung a real door by September, found it at the dump, a hollow-core interior door, and rigged it into the mine mouth with a frame she'd built out of pallet wood and patience, and she'd packed the gaps with mud and straw. She had a proper bed of milled lumber she'd scavenged. She dug a fire pit and run a stovepipe she'd cobbled from a length of culvert up through a crack in the rock, so the smoke would draw. And I swear to you that woman had engineered a chimney out of a hole in a butte and a piece of road culvert, and it worked. She had shelves. She had a row of jars. She'd planted, in buckets hauled full of dirt from God knows where, a few tomato plants and a stand of corn and some beans, and they were thin and sun-stunted, but they were alive, which was more than I'd have bet. But she had not solved winter. You cannot scavenge your way out of 19 degrees. And on that October night, with the first hard freeze coming down off the mountains, and the sky gone that deep bottomless black that means cold, I lay awake and I did the arithmetic again, the way I had been doing it all summer without admitting it. And the arithmetic said she will be all right tonight, but she will not be all right in January. And I got up. My wife stirred. "Where you going?" "Up the butte." She was quiet a moment in the dark. My wife, Ruth, is a sharper read on people than I'll ever be. "You've been going up there all summer," she said, not an accusation. "Bring her down here." "She won't come." "I know she won't. Ask anyway. And take the buffalo robe, the heavy one from the cedar chest. Don't pretend it's mine to throw out, just give it to her like a person." So I drove the truck up the wash road as far as it would go and walked the rest with the robe over my shoulder. And there was a light in the door of the cave, the little orange wink of her fire through the gap. And I knocked on a door I'd watched a homeless woman build into a mountain, and she opened it with a kitchen knife in her hand, which I respected, and lowered it when she saw me. "It's 2 in the morning," she said. "It's going to be 16 degrees by dawn. I have a fire." "You have a fire and 4 jugs of water and tomato plants you're going to lose tonight, and a chimney made out of a culvert, Della, and I have a guest room with a bed in it. And my wife sent me up here at 2 in the morning to ask you, like a person, if you'll come down and sleep where it's warm." I'd never said her name out loud to her before. I saw it land. She stood in the doorway with the firelight behind her and the cold pouring in around her, and she looked at me for a long, long time. "And tomorrow," she said, "tomorrow you come back up here if you want. It's yours. Nobody's taking it. I'm not asking you to give up the cave. I'm asking you not to freeze in it tonight." And she came. She brought the tomato plants in their buckets, 2 trips, wouldn't leave them, and she set them in the bed of my truck and rode down the mountain with her knees together and her hands in her lap like a woman going to church. And she slept in our guest room, and in the morning she was up before either of us, and she'd done the breakfast dishes that were in the sink, and she'd already walked back up the butte to check her cave by the time Ruth came out. That was the start of the winter. We became something like family, the 3 of us, in the awkward and undeclared way that real families sometimes get assembled out of leftover people. She'd sleep down at the ranch on the killing nights and go back up the rest. She helped Ruth with the canning. She fixed our chicken coop better than I'd ever built it. She and Ruth would sit at the kitchen table after dark and not talk, just sit. 2 women who'd learned the particular comfort of company that doesn't require words, and I'd watch them from the doorway and feel a thing in my chest I didn't have a name for. And slowly, in pieces, over those long nights, the story came out. Why she was the way she was. Why the cave meant what it meant. I won't tell all of it because some of it isn't mine to tell, but I'll tell you the shape. She'd spent her life 1 missed paycheck from the street. The way a third of this country lives and the comfortable third pretends not to see. She'd nursed a husband through a long dying that ate every dollar they'd ever saved and then some, and buried him and kept working. She'd taken in her sister's kids when her sister couldn't, raised them, watched them grow up and move away and not call much, which she did not blame them for. They have their own hard, she said. She'd been the person everyone leaned on and no one caught. And the day the man bought the land out from under her single-wide and gave her 30 days, she said, she sat in that trailer and did a kind of accounting of her whole life. And the bottom line was that she had given everything she had to people and places that could be taken away, every single one, and she was almost 70 and she had nothing. And she decided, this is how she put it, she decided she was done renting her own existence. "So I bought the one thing nobody wants," she said, "and now nobody can take it." You laughed. She looked at me across the table, and there was the ghost of something almost like humor in it now after months. "First day, You laughed at me. I did, I said. I'm sorry for it. Don't be. She turned her coffee cup a slow quarter turn on the table, a thing I'd seen her do 100 times, a tell, the way I fidget with my dead pocket watch that stopped at 4:10 the day my father died and I've never had the heart to fix. Everybody laughs. Then they stop. The stopping is the part worth waiting for. Now here is where I have to tell you about the hard thing. The thing she gave away. Because if I just told you the warm parts, you'd think this was a story about a sweet old woman and her cozy cave. And it isn't. It's bigger and worse and better than that. In February, a family showed up. Not at the cave, at the gas station 9 miles off, where Della filled her water jugs. A man and a woman and 3 kids and a dead truck and a story I won't doubt because I've heard it 1,000 times in this country. Work dried up. Rent didn't. The eviction, the long slide, the relatives who couldn't take 5 more mouths, the running out of road. They were sleeping in the truck in the gas station lot. The youngest kid had a cough that the gas station clerk, a decent woman, said had been getting worse for a week. Della heard the cough. And Della, who had spent her last $8 to buy a place no one could ever put her out of, who had built her whole final stand on the single principle that she would never again depend on anyone or let anyone depend on her, who had a 40-foot cave with 1 bed and 1 stove and barely enough stored food to get 1 thin woman through to spring. Della brought them home, to the cave, all 5 of them. I found out when she came down to ask Ruth for the loan of blankets. She stood in our kitchen, this woman who would not take a biscuit without a lie to cover it, and she asked for help, out loud, plainly, the proudest person I have ever known, and Ruth started pulling blankets out of the cedar chest before Della finished the sentence. There's a baby with a bad chest, Della said. The cave holds the heat, the truck doesn't. Della, I said, and I want you to know I said it gently, you don't have the food for 5 more people. You barely have it for you. And she looked at me, and she said the thing I will carry to my own grave, the thing that finished whatever was left of the man who'd laughed at her on the ridge. I know exactly how little I need, she said. I did that arithmetic a long time ago. It turns out I had it wrong by 5 people. That's the morally heavy part if you're keeping a list. Not a battle, not a grand sacrifice with a flag on it. Just a woman with almost nothing looking at people with even less, and deciding her almost nothing was a surplus. Deciding the whole hard-won principle of her life, never again will I depend, never again will I be leaned on, was less important than a baby's cough. She nearly didn't make it through that spring. None of them did easy. It was the leanest stretch I ever watched anyone live through, 6 people in a hole in a rock, and I won't pretend I stood back and admired it. I hauled food up that butte 3 times a week, and to hell with the fiction that it was charity. And Ruth got the baby to the county clinic. And the man, whose name was Hector, turned out to be a hell of a hand and worked my place all spring for wages that I'm not ashamed to say I padded. But Della was the center of it. Della was the door. She'd made herself into a door at the mouth of that cave, and it turned out a door's whole purpose is to let people in. The baby got well. I want you to have that. The cough broke in March, and the kid, a girl, Rosa, got fat and loud, and used to scream laughing in a way that echoed down the butte, so you could hear it from my place if the wind was right. And I will tell you that the sound of a baby laughing inside a silver mine that never had any silver in it is one of the strangest and best things these old ears have heard. But the story isn't over, and it doesn't stay warm because life doesn't. And the thing that happened next is the thing the title's been promising you. The everything changed. And it didn't come the way I thought. It came with a man in a county truck and a clipboard, and it came close to taking the one thing she'd believed nobody could. That's the last part. Stay with me. It's the part I've been working up to this whole time. The county man came in May, and he came smiling, which is how you know to worry. His name was Prout, and he had a clipboard and a soft handshake, and the particular cheerfulness of a person about to ruin your day on someone else's behalf. He'd driven up the Wash Road in a white county truck and parked at the bottom of the butte and walked up to the cave, where by then there was a whole little world. Della's buckets gone green and heavy with tomatoes, a clothesline strung between two juniper snags, Rosa's laundry hung out small and bright, Hector's repaired bicycle leaned against the rock. The door painted now turquoise because the woman, Hector's wife, whose name was Marable, had found a can of paint and some pride of her own. I happened to be up there. I'd taken to spending mornings up the butte, telling myself it was to drop off feed, knowing by then it was because the cave had more life in it than my quiet ranch did, and that the company of a thin, proud woman and the family she'd refused to let freeze had become, somewhere along the line, the best part of my week. Prout looked at all of it and consulted his clipboard. "Parcel 114,882, he said. "I'm looking for the owner of record, a Ms. D. Mariano." "That's me," said Della, coming to the turquoise door, wiping her hands on a rag. And Prout explained with great regret, with so much performed regret it was nearly a kind of cruelty, that there had been a title review. That the original sale, the $8 sale, had been, in the county's reassessment, improperly noticed. That a development concern had expressed interest in the Butte parcel as part of a larger acquisition, something about a solar facility, transmission corridors, words that meant someone with money had finally found a use for the useless rock. That the county was prepared to refund her purchase price and reverse the sale, and that she would, of course, need to vacate the improvements. The improvements, the door she'd built, the chimney made of culvert, the home. I watched Della's face, and I watched her do the thing I'd seen her do that first day in the dust storm, open the door of the room inside her where she kept being put out of places, and get ready to add one more to the pile. 40 years of it. Apartments and trailers and her mother's house and her sister's spare room and the single wide. And now the hole in the rock. The one thing she'd bought outright so that this exact man with this exact clipboard could never come. And he'd come anyway. I have never in my life felt a rage like I felt standing on those tailings, but Della didn't rage. Della went very still and very quiet, and she said, "I have a deed, free and clear. It says sold as is, no warranty. The county's signature is on it." "It does," Prout agreed gently, "but the notice requirements—" "I'd like that in writing," Della said. "Everything you just said, in writing, with your name on it." Prout's smile flickered, just slightly, the first crack. Because here is a thing I learned that day about people like Prout. They can do almost anything to you as long as you're too tired and too beaten and too alone to make them write it down. The writing it down is the thing they're not prepared for. The writing it down means somebody's going to read it. He left without the signature on anything. He said he'd be in touch. And then Della did the thing that changed everything, and it wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't a fight, and it's the part I most want you to hear. She didn't hire a lawyer because she had no money for a lawyer. She didn't barricade the door, though Hector offered. She didn't go quiet and pack her box and add the cave to the pile and walk into the next dust storm, which is what a beaten person does and which is what they were counting on her being. She made phone calls. 11 minutes at a time, on a flip phone, refilled with quarters. She called the clinic where Ruth had taken Rosa, and the nurse there knew a woman at the Legal Aid Society. She called the Legal Aid Society. She called the gas station clerk who'd first heard Rosa's cough, and that woman knew a reporter at the County Weekly who was always looking for a story. She called, it turned out, everyone she had touched in 2 years of being the door, every person she'd let in, every person who'd hauled a sack of beans up a butte, and it turned out. This is the arithmetic she'd had wrong, you see. This is the 5 people times 100. It turned out that a woman who spends 2 years quietly being the place where the put-out people land has, without ever intending to, built something no clipboard can reverse. She'd built a town's worth of people who would not let her be put out again. The reporter came. The story ran. Woman who bought cave for $8 faces eviction so county can sell to solar developer. It was a small story in a small paper, and it should have died there. But a thing happens sometimes. A thing I don't fully understand, where a small true story about one stubborn, proud woman and a hole in a rock gets picked up and picked up and picked up. And within 2 weeks there were 3 television trucks parked at the bottom of the butte, and a lawyer from the city working for free, and a crowd-funded account with more money in it than Della had earned in the last 10 years of her life combined. Money she did not want and tried to refuse, and finally accepted only when the legal aid woman explained, slowly, that she could use it to make sure the next person couldn't be put out so easy. The county discovered, the way counties do when the cameras come, that the notice requirements had been just fine after all, that the sale was valid, that Ms. Mariano's deed was, in fact, free and clear. The solar developer found a different rock. Prout was reassigned to an office where he could ruin days by mail instead. And the butte, the most worthless ground in the county, the hole nobody wanted, the $8 cave, the butte was, the following spring, the heart of something I still don't have a clean word for. With the money she hadn't wanted, Della didn't fix up the cave. She left the cave exactly as it was, her door, her chimney, her shelves. Instead she bought the next parcel over, the Haverson home, 40 acres at the bottom of the butte, the flat useless scrub at its foot, and she put up not a charity, she'd have spit at the word, a place. A handful of small hard cabins. A well, a real well with real water, the thing she'd hauled in jugs for 2 years. A place where a family with a dead truck and a coughing baby could land and not be put out. Not for 30 days, not ever, as long as they were working their way back up, which she would help with, and which they would do because she'd done it. And she did not let anyone forget it was possible. She called it nothing. It had no sign. People found it the way Hector found it, by word of mouth, by a clerk at a gas station who heard a cough. There were a dozen people living at the foot of that butte by the time the second winter came, and Rosa, fat and loud, ran the whole place like a tiny furious mare, and the sound of her scream laughing carried all the way to my ranch when the wind was right. I asked Della once, near the end of that second year, sitting outside her cave in the gold evening light with the whole improbable town spread out below us, why she'd done it. Why she hadn't just taken the money and the fame and gotten herself a real house in town, a soft bed, a life owed to her many times over. She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the flat rock between us. She looked out at the long flat country the way she had that first morning, like a woman surveying something that belonged to her, except now it did, all of it, the cabins and the well and the loud child and the people, and she said, "You remember what I told you, first day, that nobody could put me out of this because I was the door." I remember. I was wrong about what a door is for. She drank her coffee. The light went from gold to that deep desert orange that makes the rock look lit from inside. I thought a door was the thing that kept the world out, so nobody could ever take from me again. She set the cup down. A door's the thing that lets people in. I just had it backward for 60-some years. Took an $8 hole in a rock to turn me around. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. I'm an old man now and I keep my ledger still, the high and the low and the wind and one line about the day. I went home that evening and I wrote it down, the last line of this whole long story, and I'll give it to you the way I wrote it, because I've never found better words and I'm too old to keep trying. The woman who bought a hole because nobody could take it from her gave it away to everybody, and so now nobody can. I still fidget with the dead watch sometimes. Stopped at 4:10 the day my father died, and I never could bring myself to fix it. Della saw it once and asked why I didn't just wind it. I told her some things you keep broken on purpose, to remember. She nodded like that was the most sensible thing she'd ever heard, and she turned her cup a quarter turn, and she didn't say anything else. She didn't have to.